For our COBT viewers and listeners, it's Maynard, Mike, and Jeff with something that we're incredibly excited about. As you may know, today is the 80th anniversary of D-Day, June 6, 2024. We're now 80 years past one of the most momentous military operations in world history. So, to mark the occasion, we went on a hunt to find someone who could talk to us about this day, educate us, and make sure that we all kind of pay the proper respect to such an incredible day. We're very lucky. We have found Alex Kershaw. He's an acclaimed author and historian. He's written a double-digit number of books on World War II. And in particular, he's written a book called The First Wave. The First Wave is, as it says, it's all about D-Day and the initial invasion and the days after. It's an incredible book. We've all read it and enjoyed it. Alex, let me just stop and say we're so pleased that you could join us on such an important anniversary.
It's great to be with you.
Well, we're super excited, as I mentioned, and I think you're going to make it easy on us. You've got some slides that talk a little bit about the book. You know, just as a lead-in, Alex, you must be a really busy person. I know you're of counsel to the National World War II Museum. You do so much with so many people. What's your schedule like right now? I know you're in London as we talk, but you must be a popular guy around this anniversary.
June. This is obviously. I hope I can say this is pre-recorded, but on June the 6th itself, I think I start at 4 a.m. and don't finish till midnight because it's obviously such a massive day and. You know, I'm doing a lot in DC, several Zooms, etc. But I'm also going to live tweet all the way through the day. So actually, on the moment, sometimes on the actual second, and you'll see why in my presentation, I'm going to be live tweeting as if it was really happening today rather than 80 years ago, which is a lot of fun. It's really fun.
Well, look, full disclosure, we're shooting this on Monday, June 3rd. We're going to send this out on Thursday morning, June 6th. But I was wondering, what's your advice? Should we send it out at 12:15, which is, I think, when the first American might have hit land in France, or we usually send it out at 6 a.m., which is about when those first young men were hitting the beach.
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about that is that you're going to be actually in their time zone. You're going to be with the Americans, British, and Canadians, you know, between 6:30 and 7:30. That's the first wave landings for the Allies on D-Day. First seaborne troops arrive then, so that's a great time to do it.
Maybe we should jump into the slides, but one last personal question. I mentioned how many books you've written and your amazing history. How did you personally get so passionate about World War II and history and all of these things? What led you to do all this great work you've been doing?
Well, you know, I was a journalist. I grew up in Britain. I've spent the first 28 years of my life. I'm 58, so you can work out how long I've been in the US, 30 years. Both my grandfathers fought in World War II. You know, I loved the stories. I fell in love with World War II because of the stories. And then I became a journalist and started interviewing people that were actually there. And so, you know, the combination of actually making something of a living by talking to people who are actually there on D-Day it's always been amazing. To me, you know, one of the interesting things for me is that there's so few left alive now. So without going on too long, you know, 16 million Americans served in uniform in World War II, and there are less than 100,000 left alive today. It's actually only one officer from Omaha Beach. So one of the 5 landing beaches, the most famous American landing beach is Omaha Beach. Over 900 Americans killed there on June the 6th. There's only one officer alive today, and there's only one medic from that beach, both of whom I've been in touch with recently. So very few people left from the most important day of the 20th century.
And it probably goes without saying that at this point you've visited Normandy and all these places so many times.
Yeah, I was there just a couple of weeks ago. I don't go on June the 6th because it's just mobbed. It's like Disneyland in Normandy. So I don't tend to go on June the 6th. I have been before, but I would rather go on Memorial Day weekend. It's a really lovely time to go to Normandy because in Colville-sur-Mer, which is the American graveyard there, 9,387 Americans buried there. On Memorial Day weekend, they have an American flag and a French flag, and they're placed exactly 2 inches, almost 2 inches, I think, from each gravestone. So it's a fabulous time to go, great weather, and it's I prefer it then. Yeah.
Well, we should jump in. You've got some great slides that will, we're all fresh from the book. I'd like to think we could remember it all, but I know this is going to help jog our memory to talk to you. Have some questions at the end.
Yeah, so I'll take you through some of the most iconic images from June the 6th, 1944. So what you're looking at there is Omaha Beach, 8 sectors on Omaha Beach. That's easy red sector, second most deadly place you could be on June the 6th, 1944. Those are American troops from the 16th Infantry Regiment. And that's a colorized photograph taken by, I believe, the greatest war photographer ever, Robert Capa. He took 4 rolls of film. Only 11 of the images survived, and this is one of them. The thing to note there is the Americans clustered around defensive installations on that beach, and also how rough the water is. The waves were 6 to 8 foot high. Guys had been in those landing craft, you can see behind them, for at least 2.5 hours. They'd been puking, awful conditions. And I've met veterans who told me that they didn't care what happened to them on the beach. They just wanted to put their boots on the sand. So that is the essence of what the American experience landing on Omaha Beach was like on D-Day. Wonderful, wonderful shot. This is an interesting map because it shows you what I tried to do with the book. And so I tried to tell the story of D-Day, which has been told probably more often than any other World War II story, by picking a key leader, a key combat leader from each of the most important Allied nations, US, Canadian, and British, obviously. I even had a Frenchman, a French commando. And I tried to tell the story of D-Day through maybe a dozen at most key individuals, combat leaders who had the most important missions on D-Day. So if they'd failed, if these dozen warriors had failed on June the 6th, 1944, the world as we know it today would be very, very different indeed. They were the most likely to die, and they had the hardest jobs. So by telling their story almost in real time, doesn't take that long to read the book. I wanted to recreate the intensity, the stakes, the enormity, and the drama of D-Day. So, on the far left of my left, anyway, you'll look over, you'll see the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, both American, 101st Airborne, completely green. If you come 50 miles to the east along the beachheads, you get to the British Airborne, the 6th Airborne, and then you have the 5 critical beaches: Sword, British; Juno, Canadian. Every single Canadian on that beach that landed on D-Day was a volunteer. Gold, British, and then Omaha, the deadliest of the 5 beaches, over 900 Americans basically slaughtered. And then you come furthest west to Utah Beach, so 5 beaches. And there's really D-Day made very, very simple. So actually, we're getting really close now. And I would say that if anybody wants to look at their watch at about 9:43 p.m. English time on the 5th of June, that's the exact moment when the first Americans took off from England to participate in D-Day. And these are them here. Here's the crew of the first plane 1. That's taken around about 5, 6 o'clock on the evening of the 5th of June, 1944. The thing to note about the C-47 behind them are the colors. Those are the Overlord black and white stripes, and that's fresh paint. Over 20,000 gallons of paint used to mark out the Allied planes. And that was to prevent friendly fire. So we had, at the last minute, we painted all these planes. We didn't do so before because we thought the Germans might find out. And the idea is that anybody on the ground would see these colors and they wouldn't fire at American, British, and Canadian planes. So that's a C-47 with fresh paint. And the guy to really focus on here is the guy who is standing second from my left. So he's got the life jacket, the Mae West around him with the cap. That's Joel Crouch. He's the pilot for Plane 1. And his job is to drop the first Pathfinders. So the very first Americans to see combat on D-Day will be dropped by him over Normandy. He is one of the finest military pilots in history, certainly one of the most experienced C-47 Pathfinder pilots of World War II. And unbelievably, he dropped the very first Americans to see combat in North Africa in November 1942, in Sicily in July 1943, in Salerno, September 1943, and then D-Day, the fourth time he takes the first plane and drops Americans into combat in World War II in the European theater. He's an awesome, awesome guy. And there you have, you can tell I'm a limey because of my accent, and I'm very happily speaking to you from London right now, but I've also spent more time living in the US than I have in Britain. And you're looking at the 18 of the most amazing badasses in American history. And they are badasses. They're blacked up their faces. They are they're the stick. They're the first Pathfinders who are going to be dropped into Normandy by Joel Crouch, the guy you just saw in the previous image. So these are the first guys first Americans who will drop from around 400 to 500 feet. It's not very high at all. The plane's going up to 200 miles an hour. They have maybe less than 25 seconds from when they jump out of the plane to when they hit the ground. And these are the very first Americans who will fight on the ground to liberate northwestern Europe on June the 6th, 1944. Unbelievably, only one of them will be killed in combat on the 6th of June, 1944. And their job is to drop into Normandy and then set up beacons, radio beacons and lights to guide in an incredible sky train of several hundred C-47 planes with over 6,500 Screaming Eagles, 101st Airborne Troops. They are the very first. They're Pathfinders for a reason. They lead the way, and they're the very first. And they're led by this gentleman here. It's from upstate New York, Frank Lillyman, who officially, according to press reports in 1944, is the very first American to land in Normandy on D-Day. And he jumped out of the C-47 you just saw at around 12:15 a.m. It took him maybe 20 seconds. We don't know exactly, maybe around 20 seconds to hit the ground. And when his boots hit the dew-soaked grass of Normandy, he became officially the very first American to arrive in Normandy and see combat on D-Day. Did 47 practice jumps, never been in combat before, but he jumped 47 times while practicing. And all but one time, he shuffled to the door of the C-47 to jump out first. And all but one time, he stood at the door with smoking a stogie. He had a stogie stuck in his mouth. And one time, one of his men said, Captain, where's the stogie? And he quickly pulled out a stogie from his jacket pocket, and stuck it in his mouth and jumped. When he landed in Normandy at 12:15 a.m. on 6th of June, 1944, he had a lit cigar in his mouth when he landed. So he's officially the first American to land on D-Day. Badly wounded later on the evening of the 6th of June by friendly fire, by American fire. His face was quite badly scarred. Taken back to England, went AWOL, was demoted because he went AWOL, rejoined his unit from the 101st Airborne, fought through Normandy, Market Garden, September 1944, and the Battle of the Bulge. So that's one of the finest paratroopers that the United States has ever produced. This is a recreation of the landing at Pegasus Bridge. So when you looked at the map earlier on, you saw where the 82nd and 101st Airborne landed around Sault-Mère-Église, behind Utah Beach. If you go 50 miles, as far as you can go along the Allied beachhead, right to the far eastern end, you get to the Caen Canal, and that's what you see there. That is the Caen Canal leading from the English Channel to the city of Caen. Over that canal was a vital bridge, codenamed Pegasus Bridge, and we assigned the Ox and Bucks light infantry to take that bridge. It was a vital objective. We had to take the bridge and hold it to prevent a German counterattack, and we sent guys in 3 gliders. If you look at the glider at the front of the image there, you'll see there are wheels on the glider. those were never used. So that is a wooden plane. The pilot only has a compass and a stopwatch, and they've come from 5,000 feet with extremely thick cloud cover around 3,000 feet, using only a stopwatch and a compass, having been tugged across the English Channel by Halifax bombers. No engines, obviously, they're gliders, and they crash at around 100 miles per hour. Imagine being in a wooden glider and you crash at 100 miles an hour. The front glider there that you see in the image closest to the bridge is only around about 30 yards from the objective. So the British, this is one of the greatest moments in British military history. The attack on Pegasus Bridge, they landed, crash landed, several wounded. And then that was about 12:15 a.m., around the same time that Frank Lillyman dropped in with the 101st Airborne. We arrive at Pegasus Bridge, 50 miles away. And unbelievably, in less than 10 minutes, we seized this bridge. So one of the most daring operations of D-Day, the first successful operation of D-Day, and the greatest coup de main operation in British military history, celebrated hugely to this day. If you go there to Pegasus Bridge on June the 6th, it'll be mobbed with Brits and their families. The first code words, success signal rather, to be sent out on D-Day from over 150,000 Allied troops who were involved on D-Day. The first success code message was ham and jam. Ham for one bridge, jam for another bridge, which is just off the picture here. So first successful operation on D-Day. First Allied soldier to be killed on D-Day is just over where the planes land. If you cross the bridge, just on the other side of the bridge, that's where a guy called Lieutenant Den Brotheridge, a guy from Birmingham in the United Kingdom, where he was shot in the head and became the first Allied soldier to lose his life around about 20 past midnight on June the 6th, 1944. And if you look again at the bridge, you come over the bridge to the left, and the first building on your left there is the first building, the Café Gondry, first building to be liberated in occupied France on D-Day. So the question arises, who has bragging rights? The Canadians, the British, the French, or the Americans? So we'll discount the Canadians and we'll discount the French, if you'll forgive me. The real competition was between the Brits and the Americans, and I have to say that I'm very proud of the fact that officially the very first Allied soldier to see action on the ground was a Brit, and he belongs to the Special Air Services, Norman Poole. He was a really fantastically talented concert pianist before the war, and unbelievably, he jumped out of a C-47 at 12:12 a.m., and he was holding a gramophone when he did so. There were four other guys with him in his unit. They were surrounded by thousands of what were called Ruperts. And these are mock paratroopers, about 3 foot tall. And the idea is that they're part of a decoy unit. So they jump out of C-47s, they get to the ground, they start playing the gramophones, the portable gramophones, which play the sounds of war, explosions and artillery fire, etc. And they're surrounded by these thousands of dummy paratroopers. And the point is to try and make the Germans think that they're actually a full parachute regiment rather than just 5 crazy English guys with a gramophone surrounded by mock paratroopers. And actually, the operation did work. The Germans did fall for it, and they sent a whole bunch of German troops toward them. And the idea is that these guys drew away the Germans from other in particular American forces around Somme-Mériglyes. So there's the first Allied soldier to see action on D-Day. Here we have, I was just here in that picture. That's at Utah Beach. It's the seawall along the back of Utah Beach. And this is officially the first American soldier to come into action from the shore. It's Captain Leonard Schroeder, F Company. He belongs to the 4th Infantry Division. And when he left his landing craft and waded through the water and then actually crossed the beach at Utah, it was 6:28 officially when he came ashore, making him the very first American to invade France from the ocean. He was a highly regarded baseball player. He had a full scholarship to the University of Maryland, and was a very good friend of Theodore Roosevelt Jr., who was at age 56 the oldest German officer, American officer, and in fact oldest officer on D-Day. And Theodore Roosevelt Jr. Was the deputy division commander for the 4th Infantry Division. The thing to note about this photograph is it shows you some of the toughest action on Utah Beach, but there are only 197, I believe, casualties. Almost 30,000 Americans landed on that beach, and only 197 casualties. So this is the great success story of D-Day for the Americans, is the landing at Utah Beach. The reason why there were so few casualties is because we bombed the hell out of every single German defense that we could find from the air all along that beach. And it was a parallel bombing. So you had 3 waves of bombing. The last one passed over at about 6:24 a.m. And we just pounded. It was I would say, the most effective carpet bombing in US military history. Did an absolutely fantastic job. And so when the Americans arrived, there was very little opposition along most of the beach. Some parts, yes, but it was a lot easier to get ashore at Utah than it was at Omaha. And look at that. That's a colorized photograph. It's a National Archives shot, and this shows guys from the 16th Infantry Regiment coming into land on Easy Red sector of Omaha Beach, one of the 8 sectors there. And that shows you grit, courage, arguably the most important American sacrifice in US history. And most of the young men in that photograph, their average age when they are when they are killed in Normandy, and a lot of them will be killed. Hardly any of the men in that photograph in that boat will survive the war without being wounded or killed. Their average age when they die in combat in Normandy will be 22. They are the first wave of Americans coming into Omaha Beach, and that is an extraordinary image which represents the greatest gift that America's ever made in its history. People have to remember that June the 6th, 1944, if you're living in Washington, D.C., where I do most of the time, there's no chance that panzer tanks, that the SS or panzer tanks are going to come storming through down the mall, or they're going to occupy anywhere in America. The war is as much as won in many senses by the summer of 1944. We have to finish it off, but there's absolutely no serious threat to American democracy by the time you get to June the 6th, 1944. So these are working class Americans, 3,000-4,000 miles from home at least, who are about to give their lives so that others can be set free. So that generations that have not even been born, my generation, I'm 58, and others, will live in peace and freedom and democracy. 80 years now, almost to the exact moment, and as you're watching this on D-Day, 80 years to this very day, the longest period of time in European history that continent has been in peace, in freedom, and enjoyed democracy. If you look at European history going back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, as far back as you want to look, Europeans have been killing each other. They've been at war. This is the great achievement of American military, industrial, and spiritual and political might in its entire history, is what it achieved on D-Day and beyond. The liberation of Western Europe, the reconstitution of the defeated nations there, the defeat of genocide, of evil, and the restoration of civilization, civil rights, and reestablishment of democratic nations in Western Europe. By far the most important thing that the US has ever done in its entire history, because it did it for other people, This is probably the most celebrated, if not most seen, image depicting Americans wading ashore on Omaha Beach on D-Day. If you look at the back of the rear of the photograph, you'll see bluffs. There's a kind of haze and mist, but you can make out the bluffs. That's where the American graveyard is today. As I mentioned briefly earlier on, 9,387 Americans lying in eternal peace there. That's half the number of Americans killed during the Battle of Normandy, which goes from the 6th of June until the liberation of Paris on the 25th of August, 1944. The young gentleman on the right here was a sports journalist before the war, never been in combat, and he led the first breakout of Americans on that deadly, deadly beach, the deadliest of all on D-Day, Lieutenant John Spaulding. This is one of the several shots I'm going to show you taken by Robert Capa. I showed you one of his images earlier on, and he's using a 50mm lens. Only 11 photographs from 4 rolls survive. He's the only press photographer on Omaha Beach on D-Day. These shots will be the first images that Americans will see of the reality of D-Day and combat. They appeared in Life magazine on the 19th of June, 1944. Life magazine was read by millions back during World War II. And so if you're an American, if you've got a son, a relative involved in D-Day or in the European theater at war, this is the first time that you're actually going to get to see what might have happened to your son, or what it was like to be on D-Day and as an American invader. An extraordinary shot. There, again, it's a repetition of an earlier shot, but that shows you Americans trying to take cover behind a defensive installation placed there by the Germans. That's a very unwise thing to do on D-Day, because if you did that, if you clustered on the beach, the Germans would spot you quickly and they'd land a mortar shell or an artillery shell on you. And that's a very good way to get killed quickly on Omaha Beach. It was a natural instinct, but it's a very dangerous thing to do. What you have to do is get up, summon every last ounce of your courage, and you have to get up and you have to run or walk or whatever you can do and get off that beach. You have to go forward, not back. If you go into the water, snipers, machine gun fire will pick you off. Some guys did think that they stood a chance by going back into the water, but they were hit in the head by sniper fire pretty quickly. Some people thought they would be extra smart and they would lean back and they would only show their nostrils above the water, meaning that it didn't expose their foreheads, which snipers would spot. So maybe you'd last a while if you just waded back out and only showed your nostrils, but even then you were taking a big chance. There's a glorious shot of the reality of the first minutes of D-Day. Again, at the back of the image there today, you have the most beautiful garden of the deceased in Europe, the American graveyard. And this is the first wave troops struggling to get ashore. About halfway, if you go midway up the image, you'll see the beach and you'll see some various figures along a stone, shale, pebble rise. And those are Americans in the first wave who've been pinned down. So they are under enormous fire. They are literally, if they lift their heads just a couple of inches from that stone rise, they'll be shot, they'll be killed. This is a moment it's extraordinarily dramatic. And thanks to Robert Capa, we can see what it was like early on June the 6th, 1944. This is probably around about 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning. That is what it looked like from a side angle. And those are Rommel's asparagus. Those are wooden stakes. They've got mines along them. So if you're a landing craft and you hit one of those, you get blown up. And you can see, again, soldiers trying to take cover behind those obstacles. And that stretches for 5.5 miles all the way along Omaha Beach, which is shaped like a crescent. And so those people who are listening in or watching, if you've seen Saving Private Ryan, the first 20 minutes are perhaps the best ever depiction of the reality of D-Day. World War II veterans that I've interviewed have said that it's the most realistic recreation of World War II. And Spielberg, when he was making Saving Private Ryan, he looked at these images. These were the only images he could find of what it was really like to be there in the first minutes of D-Day. And so he used these images while he was making Saving Private Ryan. This is how close Kappa was. Again, no telephoto lens. He's 20, 30 feet from people at most, and he's got really close here. He's only a few yards maybe. And there he is. This is Private Houston Riley, F Company, 16th Infantry Regiment. And think about this. I want you to think about this. This is the third time that this guy has got out of a landing craft under enemy fire in the European theater. First time, North Africa, November 1942, July 1943, and then D-Day. Third time coming out of a landing craft when the ramps down into machine gun bullets. And there he's signed the photograph there. So one of the most dramatic moments, or rather few minutes of D-Day, was when the American Rangers under the legendary Earl Rudder, he's on the left of the image on the left here, US Rangers, when they seized Pointe du Hoc, it's around about cliffs around about 100 feet high. Omar Bradley, who was commander of US forces on D-Day, said that the taking of Pointe du Hoc was the most difficult mission on D-Day. And so these guys came ashore from landing craft, and they literally had to scale up these cliffs at Pointe du Hoc, with the Germans throwing grenades down at them, firing mortars down at them under intense fire. Just over 200 Rangers from the 2nd Ranger Battalion landed at Pointe du Hoc, 7:30 a.m., 45 minutes late because they were misdirected, but they finally found the right headland. And by the end of D-Day, there were less than 100 still standing and fighting. So an extraordinary level of violence experienced there. But imagine you're at the bottom of those cliffs and you're attaching a grappling hook to a rocket, and you're firing the rocket onto the top of the cliffs and then climbing up what you can see there in the image there. That's not taken on D-Day. Those guys didn't sit around and talk about how they were going to do it on D-Day. They just got up there as fast as possible. But it shows you what the extent of that challenge on D-Day. There's George Kirshner. He's shaking Earl Rudder's hand. Earl Rudder became perhaps the most successful president of Texas A&M. He was a graduate of Texas A&M. He was 34 years old on D-Day. He had 4 kids. Wasn't supposed to be there, but the commander of those Rangers basically broke down, had a nervous breakdown, was taken aside, and then Earl Rudder at the 11th hour assumed command of the 2nd Ranger Battalion and led the assault. And there's George Kirshner, a guy that I feature in my book, and he became commander of D Company that very morning because every other officer in D Company had been killed. This is how easy it was to get promoted in World War II. Just had to stay alive and do the job. Pure meritocracy. And there's the ultimate citizen soldier. Owensboro, Kentucky, Lieutenant John Spaulding. He was a sports writer before the war. It was around about 6:32, 6:30 a.m., H hour, when he landed with the first wave and managed to get across the beach. Before he got across the beach, he went into he got off the landing craft, and there were runnels along Omaha Beach, some of them 12 to 18 feet deep. He went into the water with a pack on his back, managed somehow to get rid of the pack, didn't drown miraculously, got onto the beach, ran across the beach, Southern uniform, got to the shale rise that I showed you earlier on, and then with a sergeant called Strezik, a Polish immigrant, he led the first American platoon off Omaha Beach. So this is the first breakout from bloody Omaha, and this is the path that he took. On either side of this path, there are dunes, and they are mined. There are mines everywhere. And miraculously, he led the 18 guys in his platoon up a winding path, and not one of them was wounded. Not one wounded. A couple of hours later, other Americans followed, and several were killed or wounded by mines. So he himself said it was a miracle when he got to the top of this bluff. He reached the top of that bluff around about 8 o'clock in the morning, officially making him the first American combat officer to lead Americans off the deadliest beach on D-Day. Now, I'll pause just a second here, and I would like to stress this to people listening. Sometimes in history, there are certain days that are extremely important. D-Day, 6th of June, is one of those. On D-Day, the 6th of June, history was changed by maybe a couple of hundred, at most, young Americans on Omaha Beach. A couple of hundred young Americans said to themselves, and most importantly, others around them that they were responsible for, you will not stay here and die. You will stand up and you will run into enemy fire. Even if you lose your life, so be it. But you will not stay here because we have to get off this beach. If we don't get off this beach, we will not take Omaha Beach. If we do not take Omaha Beach, D-Day will fail. If D-Day fails, millions and millions of Europeans will be doomed to live under Nazism or communism. Anne Frank, hiding in her apartment in Amsterdam, in her diary on June the 6th, 1944, when she heard the news that the Allies had arrived, Americans, British, and Canadians predominantly, she wrote in her diary, "Our friends have arrived at last." He and the Americans like him that led the way off Omaha Beach changed history. So yes, individuals do matter. Small groups of individuals can change everything. And also, courage matters. Courage matters a great deal. Here's a superstar of World War II. I'm British, as you can tell, and he is from the United Kingdom. He's Scottish, in fact. That's Lord Lovat. He led over 2,500 British commandos ashore at Sword Beach. That's a hunting rifle he's got slung over his shoulder. It's not a standard issue British rifle for the army. And D-Day was only his third day of combat. He's an aristocrat at a 20,000 acre hunting estate in Scotland. He's a fantastic writer. He wrote one of the most moving books from World War II. It's called March Past. He was married. He was a wonderful, wonderful leader and a swashbuckler, a real Scotsman, a real Scottish poet, warrior, and predator. In fact, the rifle you see that he's got slung over his shoulder, he used that rifle on D-Day and shot a German from around 400 yards that was in the distance. So his hunting skills came to great use on D-Day. And this is one of these absolutely amazing images that show you a moment in history that's unbelievable, because the guy that I just showed you, Lord Lovat, is circled there in the image, coming ashore at Sword Beach. In the foreground is the only guy to wear a kilt from over 150,000 Allied soldiers who landed on D-Day. And he was the only guy to play the bagpipes on D-Day. That is Piper Millen. There's actually a memorial to him on the very beach today. There'll be a lot of people there today, 6th of June, paying homage to the British commandos and to Millen himself. And Lovat had said to him, "Millen, I need a word with you. This is in training. And on D-Day, when we arrive on D-Day, we're going to be the fine, sharp edge of the British military on D-Day. That's what he said to all of his men. And I want you to play the bagpipes." And Millen said, "But sir, we're not allowed to play the bagpipes in the British Army. After the First World War, it's been forbidden, because in the First World War, in the trenches, they'd start up with the pipes and the Germans would hear the pipes and boom, you've been shelled to hell." So it was banned. You couldn't play the bagpipes in any part of the British military. Lovat said, "Millen, Mr. Millen, you've forgotten one thing. You're not in the British Army while you're serving under me, because I'm a Scotsman. And so you're going to play the pipes and you're going to wear a kilt on D-Day." And he did. And he's playing the bagpipes here. I don't, but maybe it's Bonnie Prince Charlie. I don't know, but he played the classics literally all day long. This is around 8:30 in the morning on Sword Beach. When he said after the war that in an interview, he survived, obviously. He said after the war that he let Lovat go first because he wanted him to test the depth of the water to see how deep it was. So there's Lovat going first. Millen follows. He's wearing the kilt, and he said, "When I got into the water, it was really, really cold. It was actually 57 degrees on D-Day. And my kilt rose up in the water, and it was like a tutu. It was like floating on the water like a tutu." So there are many scientific studies that have been done about the size of various nationalities' testicles, and we know that us English anyway, we are convinced of the fact that the Scottish testicles are slightly smaller than English ones. So, needless to say, they were very, very small indeed on D-Day. Anyway, I'll move on with that. That usually plays out pretty well in some places, but other places in front of Scotsmen, no one laughs. In fact, people often think about throwing things at me. But anyway, that's my ugly mug, and that was taken while I was researching the first wave. And this guy that I'm sat next to on the left, he died last year. He passed away last year, and he was a god in France. This guy is a superstar to the power, I don't know. Because think about this. On D-Day, there were only 177 Frenchmen who saw action on D-Day. 177 Frenchmen had the unbelievable honor of invading their own country, or rather landing in their own country and setting it free. Under Nazi occupation, under the German jackboot from 1940 until 1944, 177 Kiefer commandos, obviously under British ultimate command. Lord Lovat was his boss, and they landed on the Sword Beach, and Leon Gautier here fought all along Sword Beach to Ouistreham. And he was the last living French commando when he passed away last year. And that photograph was taken when there were only 4 French commandos left alive. Off to the left of the picture, you can't see it, is his British commando green beret, which he just, I wasn't allowed to touch his beret. That's how sacred an object it was to him. What's really cool about this photograph is that the oil painting that you see in the background is actually a painting of the very place where he came ashore on D-Day, on Sword Beach. And the house he's living in, the photograph's taken of him in, is around about half a mile from that beach. So he spent most of his adult life, but certainly after D-Day, he lived in Ouistreham, less than a mile from where he'd landed as a commando with the British on D-Day. And he would walk his dog along the beach year after year, day after day, for decades, along the very same place where he fought as a commando. He and his buddies took out 12 German defensive installations in about 4 hours. A Tommy gun was his weapon, single shots, head or heart, 4 miles, 12 different German installations. That is a badass. That's a French badass. The last one who passed away last year. And when he passed away, headlines in every French newspaper, television programs, etc. Those are the British coming ashore at Sword. The first landings for the Americans at Utah and Omaha were 6:30. That was called H hour. And the British and Canadians landed about an hour later, 7:30, because of the different tides in Normandy. In fact, the tides in Normandy are the second fastest in that entire region, northwestern Europe. Many men who were wounded and fell to the sands, certainly on Utah and absolutely on Omaha, they couldn't crawl quickly enough when they were wounded, and they drowned. So this is a really great. It's the best image that shows you the heat of the action and the heart of the matter on the British beach on D-Day. You can see guys who've been shot, others helping the wounded. These are the Canadians. Juno, second deadliest beach, over 900 KIA. Omaha, around about 300 Canadians killed on Juno. And every single guy in that image that you're looking at there has volunteered to do this job. That wasn't the case with any other allied nation. These are the only volunteers. Let's not forget they've been at war, the Canadians, since 1939. And many of the guys that landed on Juno Beach had left Canada in 1940 and had been waiting to see action for an awful long time. And this is actually a still from the only movie reel that we have from the early minutes of each of the beach's landings. It's a really intense shot. I actually can't believe that this guy over here, the coxswain on the far right of the picture with the helmet, that he has his head up. so far. He has to be able to see what's happening because he's landing these guys, but that's a very dangerous thing to do because of the intensity of sniper fire. Now, if you look at this image carefully, the second from left is Omar Bradley, famously known as the GI General, lionized, eulogized by Ernie Pyle. And he is in charge of all US ground forces on D-Day. And here he's around about 5 miles off Omaha. And it's about 11 o'clock in the morning on June the 6th, 1944. And he's trying to see what's happening on Omaha Beach. And they have to remember that he's been told in the last couple of hours that what's happening on Omaha Beach is a complete disaster. It's a bloodbath. In fact, one intelligence report that he's received has said simply, we are being slaughtered like hogs. So you're looking at a guy here who is thinking to himself, do I pull off the Americans from Omaha Beach? Do I pull off the 1st US Infantry Division and the 29th US Infantry Division? That's almost 30,000 US troops from Omaha Beach. Because if I leave them there, this is going to be even more of a bloodbath and a slaughter. Everything is indicated to him that this is a huge failure, one that he has planned, and he's in ultimate command of. Thankfully, he starts to get some intelligence reports around about 11:30 to midday on June the 6th that indicate to him that yes, some Americans have broken off Omaha Beach, that men like Lieutenant John Spaulding, young, incredibly courageous American combat leaders, working class kids from Kentucky, Arkansas, you name it, have got up off that beach, that deadly beach, and led others inland. And therefore, they should stay because they are moving off the beach at last. But remember, 6:30 a.m. in the morning, 6:30 a.m. in the morning until almost midday, that's the length of time that this guy is thinking, what's going on? What do I do? Is this a success or a failure? And so, because of Lieutenant John Spaulding, because of maybe a couple of hundred American combat leaders who do the job, who get off the beach, and then their actions are reported to him, Omaha Beach is taken. We do stay. We do not pull off those two divisions, and therefore D-Day is a success, not a failure. And you have to remember that this very same guy, Omaha Bradley, said that if we had failed on D-Day, we would never have gone back. You cannot launch an operation, the most extensive, most ambitious, largest military operation of World War II, the greatest amphibious operation in history. You don't get to just restart that and replay it again from scratch. That's how close we came to failure and success. The margin was so close. This shows you the reality of sacrifice on D-Day. So you'll see the red markings along the beach. These are the main German defensive installations. There's 5 exits, draws off Omaha Beach. To get soldiers, tanks, equipment, to get off that beach, you have to seize each of these 5 exits. And they lead up steep bluffs. Very different to Utah Beach, where once you're across the beach and through some dunes, you're inland. Each of those 5 exits were extremely well defended, and we didn't take a single one. Not one, according to plan, was taken from a frontal assault. We had to outflank each of them. So we had to choose places where there was least machine gun fire, where there was most smoke, most cover, and we had to exit the beach there and then outflank, come from behind, and then take the main exits. This shows you in detail the penetration, the blue lines, blue dotted lines show you where we'd reach by the end of D-Day. And in some cases, it's not very far at all. It's less than a mile. But that's a representation of what it really took to succeed there. This is a colorized shot of one of the men from the 16th Infantry Regiment. So you have over 900 killed on Omaha Beach, 4,700 casualties. From one regiment alone, That's a regiment is around about 1,200 guys. 247 killed. That's the 116th Infantry Regiment from the 29th Infantry Division. 247 men killed. A company, full strength is 180 guys. 180 guys landed in the first wave in the right place on Omaha Beach, and 102 out of 180 are killed. And those 102 were killed in maybe about 20, 30, 40 minutes. Company A, 102 killed. Those are the guys that you see in the first 20 minutes of Saving Private Ryan. An absolute bloodbath and slaughter. Among those men from Company A, which was a National Guard unit before the war, from Bedford, Virginia, which was the hometown of Company A. So, kids in late 1930s in a rural community, Bedford, Virginia, they joined the National Guard because they were patriotic, but mostly because they wanted to put food on the table and feed their families. There were 34 guys still from Bedford, Virginia in the first wave landing. They were the only guys, A company, to land in the right place at the right time along all of Omaha Beach. 5.5 miles, the only guys to land in the right place at the right time. 19 from that community, which was 3,000 strong in 1944, were killed on Omaha Beach. 19 from one town of 3,000 on Omaha Beach. That's why today, June the 6th, 2024, 80 years later, the US's only National D-Day Memorial is in Bedford, Virginia, fittingly, because that community suffered the highest per capita losses of any Allied community on D-Day, Bedford, Virginia. Quickly, this is the extent of the Allied penetration on D-Day. You can see far over on the far left, you have Utah, you have the airborne landings. Omaha, just look how far we got. We were supposed to get way beyond that towards the road that you see linking Bayeux and Caen. Didn't get that far at all. The most successful operations on D-Day were carried out by the Canadians in terms of penetration. They overreached their finish line. So you'll see the road that comes through behind the British Corps and the Canadian Corps. The Canadian there at Juneau, you'll see that they managed to get beyond where they were supposed to be at the end of D-Day. Caen here is around 12 miles inland from Sword Beach. It took us another 7 weeks to go basically 8 miles. So you'll see the extent of the penetration there. This is D-Day 80 years ago today, broken down in some numbers, and it just gives you a sense of the enormity of this operation. Almost 12,000 aircraft, over 14,000 different sorties, 6,000 sea vessels. We killed more than 4,000 Germans, over 10,000 Allied casualties. But just look briefly at the breakdown of casualties here. Less than 1,000 Canadian, 2,700 from the United Kingdom, 6,603 US casualties. And that, the disproportionate number of US casualties is basically boils down to what happened on Omaha Beach. The important thing I should stress here is that proportion of losses will only continue to grow throughout the rest of the liberation of Western Europe. By the Battle of the Bulge, by December of 1944, we're now at 6th of June 1944. By December of 1944, 75% and more of the dying and the casualties on the Western Front in Europe are American. So as my grandmother used to say, those Yanks, they arrived way too late, but they represented to us one thing. They represented hope. And boy, did they finish the job. If you live in France, if you live in Italy, if you live in Holland, if you live in Belgium, and indeed, if you are German, the end of that war, the defeat of untold evil, predominantly lay in the hands, certainly from June the 6th, 1944 onward, with a working class American. They were the ones that are the reason why you today are free, why you can walk to a ballot box, why you are not in a concentration camp. And it should be never, ever, ever forgotten. This is last but one, but these are the guys at Point de Hoc. They arrived at 7:30 a.m. on June the 6th, 1944, and they fought without any relief for 48 hours until around about 9 o'clock, 9:30 on the 8th of June, 1944. And many of the guys that you see in this photograph had not slept the night of the 5th of June or the 4th of June. So we're talking about 2 days of constant, continual combat, constant German counterattacks. From 225 guys, you've only got, I think it's around 90 guys still standing and fighting that you see in that photograph when they were relieved by their fellow Americans. This is a photograph of incredible resilience, stamina, and courage. Final image. So I think that my message today on June the 6th, on D-Day, is that when we look back at World War II, when we look back at any conflict, especially today, we should think about not just the victory and not just what that victory led to, which was the liberation of Western Europe, the most important chapter in American history, if you're not an American, put it that way. America's finest hours, Western civilization's finest hours, the Atlantic Alliance's finest hours. But we should also not only think about the achievement, the 80 years of democracy, unity, peace, freedom, and mostly, let's be honest, prosperity. The best time to be a European ever has been since Americans, British, French, and Canadians landed on June the 6th, 1944. What June the 6th D-Day led to is an extraordinary, amazing chapter in human history. We also need to remember the individuals who gave their lives for us so that we could live in the world that we live in and take so much for granted. Freedom, democracy, those are incredibly precious things that others have to die so that we can die for, so that we can enjoy them. Freedom, certainly in America and every other democracy that I know of, has always been bought with blood. These are 19 men from one small rural community in Virginia, 19 Bedford boys who died today, June the 6th, in 1944, so that we could live in freedom. These are the faces of sacrifice. This is the true meaning of D-Day. Young people never getting to have a life. Giving everything, giving all of their tomorrows so that we could enjoy today, right now. This is what we should never, ever forget. So I'm kind of wrapping up there. I've really enjoyed talking to you guys, and I would love to answer any questions if you need me to.
Well, Alex, you did such an incredible job, of course, with the book, but with your presentation. It's hard to think of one question in particular, but I'll throw one out, and I know Mike and Jeff will have one or two as well. But in the book, I grew up listening to the phrase "the special relationship" between the U.S. and the British. But in the book, you got a better sense of what that really meant because, in the opening of the book, you've got Eisenhower making the decision on whether or not he's going. But at that table, I mean, it's like a board where you have a number of key British, a number of key Americans, and Eisenhower's in charge. And then uniquely, Winston Churchill and Roosevelt have said, hey, it's your call, Eisenhower. So you have, this is an incredible thing. This is not just allies. This is one team comprised of British and Americans. It's a very striking thing.
Yeah, it's the most powerful example of Allied warfare, of what you call some people have called the special relationship. But yes, that's given all the problems they faced, the challenges, the super egos among these guys, Eisenhower, Allied Supreme Commander, did a fantastic, wonderful job. It's, you can go and buy books on leadership, etc., and study leadership. But if you really want to look at an example of extraordinary amazingly impactful leadership. Look at Eisenhower in the run up to D-Day, because yes, as you said, he was the only man who had the authority, or rather was given the authority to decide, let's go, as he famously said early on around 4:30 a.m. on the 5th of June, 1944. He finally walked back and forth, looked at his commanders, and said quietly, let's go. So, yeah, a special relationship, an incredible alliance, and one that delivered Western Europe from evil.
Yeah, Alex, read the book. It was a fantastic book. It was just the courageousness of the soldiers. You really depicted it well, and I think Maynard just hit it as well. I mean, I think the thing we didn't talk enough about, you didn't talk enough about, is just the commanders. Eisenhower, he was literally there on the ground. He was basically, as people were leaving, we're sending them off, and you talked about him having like 60 unfiltered cigarettes a day, and just the amount of stress he went into. Maybe just talk a little bit about him a little bit. We talked about the soldiers, and we can never forget the soldiers, but just him, just what he did on a day, just maybe some stories that you probably didn't tell in the book that you want to kind of.
Yeah, well, I love Ike. I know that everyone used to say I like Ike, etc. I mean, I'm a huge fan. He was 54 years old on D-Day. I think it was at least 60 filterless cigarettes he was smoking. He had a ringing in his ear and a tremor in his hand. So it was difficult for him to actually write out orders. He did it really slowly because he had such a nervous tremor in his hand. And so he had come from Malta. He was brought to London in January of 1944. And, he was put in charge of the Overlord operation, Overlord being the Battle of Normandy, beginning with June the 6th, 1944. And it was an extraordinary challenge. There was no plan B. There's no backup. He wrote to friends back in the US in April of 1944 saying that we're staking everything on one game here. One turn of the cards, it's all on the table. So the stakes were extraordinary. The pressure was immense. And yet he was a fantastic politician and diplomat. He managed to smooth feathers. He was like oil on water. He was charming, genuine, made decisions quickly, had authority, but most of all, created alliances and created cooperation between different people, flattered people, brought out the best in them, listened to them carefully, and then made clear decisions, was not arrogant, was all about creating and strengthening relationships, predominantly between the British and the Americans. We mustn't forget that D-Day, in many ways, was a British plan. Eisenhower is the Allied Supreme Commander, but of the 8 most senior commanders on D-Day, only 2 were American, as Bradley and Eisenhower. The rest are Brits. So you're a Yank with one guy backup, and you're talking to 6. You've got 6 Brits who you have to be a part of a team with. You have to tell what to do. So that takes a bit of skill. If you've spent any time with Brits or been in England, it takes a little bit of skill, especially when you're outnumbered. But he did it, and it's a fantastic testament to his leadership, to what real leadership boils down to. There's no better example, I think, in history. And it shows you why he became a great president of the United States too, because he knew how to get people to do things.
I thought the storytelling of the book was just, as Maynard said, it was an easy read. It was enlightening. I knew a lot of the post-war history of Colonel Rudder as an Aggie, but it was really interesting to the way you depicted, the characters and the personalities. I was wondering, my favorite story within the book was around the Cafe. I'll screw the name, Cafe Gondry, because you tied in, the participation of the local French and support. The wife, harkened back to her nurse days and was treating soldiers. Do you have a favorite anecdote
about the airborne operation at Pegasus Bridge?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I've actually met the daughter. The Cafe Gondry was obviously owned by, well, not obviously, but was owned by the Gondry family, and the daughter was very young indeed on D-Day. And I met her, I think, 10 years ago. and the cafe is still there. You can still go on today. You can go. There's going to be a long queue. You're going to be at the back of a long line, but you can literally go to that cafe and order yourself a coffee. And Major Howard, who was with the Ox and Bucks, I showed that image earlier on of the gliders landing at Pegasus Bridge. There were some really beautiful photographs of him coming back after the war, and he's sitting at the cafe at a table drinking a glass of champagne with Monsieur Gondry, the guy that owned the cafe, the first building to be liberated on D-Day. So for many years, when I used to go back to Normandy in the 90s and over 20 years ago now, there were quite a few British vets still alive, quite a few guys from the Ox and Bucks and the British 6th Airborne still alive. And I remember the first time I went to Normandy, I drove over Pegasus Bridge, and suddenly I saw like maybe 100 or more British guys, all in their 80s, drinking pints of beer, sat around in cafe at that cafe at tables, etc. Someone had brought the beer in, and there was all these guys with green berets, like sitting there drinking pints. Well over 60 years after D-Day. It was amazing.
Well, Alex, this has been fantastic. The experience of reading the book and then you presenting it like that, and then getting to ask some questions. I think I just maybe have one wrap-up question for us. So we're doing this on the 80th anniversary of D-Day, and I guess the rough math of any war is it's unfortunately fought by 20-year-olds, and 80 years later, we're almost out of them in terms of veterans, and so that's where we now are with World War II. You've written about it so much, and it was such a, I don't know how to describe it, but it was such a moment in world history. How do you think about preserving the meaning or the takeaways or the lessons? Like how do we impart to the generations to come some of the amazing lessons and amazing people that came out of this terrible conflict?
I think that generation, the so-called greatest generation, and certainly the dozens of D-Day veterans that I've been privileged to know and write about, what they would want most is for young people in the US, in Britain, in any democracy, to preserve their freedoms that have been so hard won, to be public servants, to serve others, to be active in their communities, to vote, and to protect at all costs democracy. To remember that the Atlantic Alliance is the plank of global civilization. To this day, still the most important relationship is between North America and Europe. You take away that relationship, what is there left, truly? And I think that they would want to be remembered, and they would want their stories told, and they would want young people to remember them and to remember what they fought for and what so many of them gave their lives for, which was for democracy, decency, human rights, and a civilized world. And the challenge is still there before us. We haven't won this campaign. We have to be vigilant. As Leon Gautier told me, the French commando, we must always remain vigilant. We must always be strong. We should celebrate warriors. We should support our military. And we should always remember that democracy is fragile and it needs to be protected and nurtured and is worth fighting for.
Wonderful. Well, Alex, thank you for all the work you have been doing with your whole career, highlighting all these things. We're delighted to get to know you. We can't wait to meet you in person, but from all of us here at Veritain and in our broader community, thank you.
Well, thank you guys. Thanks very much. It's been awesome.
Yes, sir. Bye, everyone.